Allie, come on.
You don't know the words.
Okay. That's okay. We just know it's staring.
Welcome to the rest of your life. We're going to talk about Shepard Siegel's findings and the limitations of classical conditioning. Siegel discovered the effects of drug addiction, withdrawal, and how the brain becomes used to the drug. Classical conditioning is defined as a learning process where two stimuli are repeatedly paired to the point the second response is displayed without the first stimuli. The limitations of such conditioning, mostly animal subjects, requires a response or reflex. Conditioning can become extinct and relearned.
Thorndike's law of effect states that if a response or action is received with a pleasurable experience, then it is more likely to happen again and again. Thorndike created the original box, but Skinner then took the box and created his own, which was dubbed the Skinner box. The Skinner box reinforced Thorndike's law of effect by finding out, through his observations, that behavior will likely be repeated when it has a reinforcement, in other words, a cookie or praise, and tend not to be repeated with punishment, something bad. And the basic gist of the box was an electrified grid with some sort of animal on the inside, rat, cat, whatever, and then the box itself, along with two levers, one which allowed the animal to escape or receive a treat, and one which powered the electric grid and shocked the animal. And then the animal, through trial and effect, would figure out which lever to push. When it was shocked with the wrong lever, it was most likely to not do it again. When it was shocked with the correct lever, it was more likely to use that lever.
Reinforcement. Primary reinforcement occurs naturally and does not require learning in order to work. Secondary reinforcement involves stimuli that have become rewarding by being paired with another reinforcement stimulus. A positive reinforcer is a stimulus which, when it follows a response, serves to increase the probability of the response in the future. A negative reinforcement, stopping, removing, or avoiding a negative outcome or aversive stimulus, strengthens a response or behavior. Omission is when something that the subject enjoys is taken away as punishment, decreasing undesirable behavior. Punishment refers to any change that occurs after a behavior that reduces the likelihood that behavior will occur again in the future.
Shaping is an experimental process used in operant conditioning by which successive approximations of a target behavior are reinforced.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about extinction and operant conditioning. In operant conditioning, extinction can occur if the trained behavior is no longer reinforced or the type of reinforcement is no longer rewarding to the subject in question. Like I said, an operant conditioning occurs when a response is no longer reinforced following discriminative stimulus. To give an example of this, let's say you're training your dog to sit. Every time that you tell your dog to sit, you give him a treat. But if, and over time, of course, your dog associates sitting whenever you tell them to with getting the treat, so they do it because there's a reward involved, and they've been trained to know that that is the case. But if you start telling them to sit without the treat, what this is basically saying is that over time, the behavior or their willingness to sit might become extinct because there is no longer a reward involved. The reward that they associated with the action is no longer being gained, so the response is no longer reinforced. And we can think about this in terms of people too. Let's say you're doing a homework assignment and all homework assignments are worth 20 points, and if you do this extra bonus question, it's worth 5 points of extra credit. The 5 points of extra credit is the reinforcing of the stimulus of doing the extra question because you get the extra points. But if all of a sudden the extra credit question only becomes worth half a point, it's taking away the big reward or taking away the substantial reward. It's no longer really beneficial to you. So the behavior you've developed of doing this extra credit question is more likely to die out than it was before because the reward is no longer punitive. Levi, sit. Levi, sit. Levi, sit. Levi, sit. Levi, sit. Levi, I swear to God, sit.
In conditioning, Stimulus generalization is a tendency for the conditioned stimulus to evoke similar responses after responses have been conditioned. For example, if a child has been conditioned to fear a stuffed white rabbit, it will inhabit fear of objects similar to the conditioned stimulus, such as the white toy rabbit.
Walking through a party in the county jail. The prison band was there, they began to wail. The band was jumping and the joint began to swing. You should have heard this knocked out jailbird sing. Let it rock. Everybody let it rock.
Stimulus discrimination is when we learn to respond only to the original stimulus and not to other similar stimuli. The concept of stimulus discrimination follows from the idea of stimulus generalization, which is when we respond not only to the original stimulus, but also to other similar stimuli. For example, whenever you come home from work, the first thing you do is feed your dog. As a result, your dog gets excited as soon as he hears your car pulling up at the driveway, barking and running to the door. Eventually, he begins to get excited as soon as any family member arrives in their car, thinking that he will get fed as well. Every time he hears any car pull up at the driveway, he starts barking and running to the door. That is stimulus generalization. But if none of the other family members ever feed the dog as soon as they arrive home, your dog eventually learns that it is only the sound of your car pulling up at the driveway that's worth getting excited about. That is stimulus discrimination, because he learns to distinguish only the specific sound that means food is coming and learns to ignore all other car sounds as not relevant to his getting fed. The discriminative stimulus is a stimulus in the presence of which a particular response will be reinforced. Within any educational program, there are correct and incorrect answers. For example, consider a letter discrimination program where printed cards with different letters on them are placed on a desk in front of a student. That student is then asked by a teacher to point to the letter B. When the teacher asks the student to point to the card with a B on it, then the card with the letter B on it is the correct answer, while the cards without the letter are the incorrect answers. Keeping with the letter discrimination program, this means that when the teacher says point to B, if there's a card on the table with the letter B on it, then the student's response of selecting this card will lead to reinforcement. This reinforcement could be praise, like a well done, or it could be through delivery of a generalized reinforcer, like a piece of candy. An everyday example would be if you went to wash your hands and wanted hot water, the hot water tap or faucet is the discriminative stimulus. In this situation, because selecting the hot tap will lead to the delivery of reinforcement, hot water.
Schedules of reinforcement. These refer to the description of the conditions which determine when a response will be followed by a reinforcer. They determine how and when the occurrence of a response will be followed by the delivery of the reinforcer and extinction, where no response is reinforced. They also influence how an instrumental response is learned and maintained by reinforcement. Now, there's continuous reinforcement, which is a schedule in which every response is followed by a reinforcement. There's partial reinforcement, which is a contingency of reinforcement in which reinforcement doesn't follow every single response. Now, there are 4 simple schedules that are almost always followed. There's the fixed ratio schedule, which is a contingency defined by the number of responses an organism must make to get a reinforcer. There is a variable ratio schedule, which is a contingency defined in terms of the average number of responses required to get a reinforcer, but it's not always constant. There is a fixed interval schedule, which is a contingency defined by the amount of time that must pass since the previous reinforcer was had, before another can be had. And there is a variable interval schedule, a contingency defined by the average interval that must elapse since the last reinforcer before a response will be reinforced, but it's not always constant. Swag.
Behavior modification are techniques used to increase and decrease behavior frequencies of behavior. A psychologist may use negative or positive reinforcement to study the behavior changes in a person by focusing on the stimuli. For example, if a person is trying to quit smoking, another person rather than giving them a cigarette, then you may give the person their favorite piece of candy instead of a cigarette. The pros of punishment include that it generally leads to people avoiding bad behavior or honesty of wrongdoings, and in some cases the results are quick due to fear. The cons of punishment are that it includes that if punishment is not consistent, starting at the beginning of bad behavior, then the behavior will only change temporarily or not at all. Also, too harsh of punishment can lead to mental problems or harboring negative feelings, causing almost 100% failure rate, especially amongst children. Punishment must come from a powerful or highly authoritative source, or the effect will not work.
Eccentric rewards are physical rewards given for accomplishments. It is tangible recognition of a person's accomplishments. Instinct rewards are more internal. For example, the rewards of losing weight or gaining muscle after working out.